Hello, everyone. This is Tanya McCausland from Diamond Six Leadership and Strategy, where you learn to lead yourself and your organization to reach your greatest potential. And I want to welcome you to our Faculty Spotlight. During the Faculty Spotlight, I interview one of our amazing faculty members to learn a bit about their area of expertise in the field of leadership and professional development. Plus, we'll learn some tips and strategies for continuing to develop our own leadership skills. And you definitely want to stick around to the end because we're going to do a set of rapid fire questions where we'll get to know their personal side a little bit as well. So today I am really excited to have Dr. Brad Johnson with me to talk about mentoring. Brad is professor of psychology in the Department of Leadership, Ethics, and Law at the United States Naval Academy and a faculty associate in the Graduate School of Education at Johns Hopkins University. He's an expert on the topic of mentoring and has written several books, including The Elements of Mentoring with his co-author Charles Ridley, Athena Rising, How and Why Men Should Mentor Women with his co-author David Smith. His forthcoming book, Good Guys, How Men Can Be Better Allies for Women in the Workplace, with Harvard Business Review, is coming out October of 2020. You can learn more about Brad at his website, wbradjohnson.com. So Brad, thank you so much for joining me today and congrats on your next book. How exciting.
Thanks, Tanya. I'm delighted to be here. Yeah.
So I am going to go out and I am going to call you a mentoring guru. I hope that's okay with you.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't call myself that, but if you want to, that's fine.
I'm going to call you that if you're okay with it.
Sure.
And you have really made this the main topic of your work. So how and why did the topic of mentoring, and especially the topic of men mentoring and supporting women in the workplace, become a professional focus for you?
Yeah, great question. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and my early research was all around treatments for depression. And I found it really depressing. And it was one of my own graduate students who came to me one day with this interesting article on mentoring, and it got us talking. He ended up doing his dissertation under my supervision on mentoring. And that was really the pivot point. That was really early in my career. I really focused almost entirely on mentorship. How does it look when it's done really well? And that's really kind of captivated me for my career. And then it was really about 9 years ago, my sociology colleague, David Smith, came along and teaching together at the Naval Academy. And all Dave's research was on gender, work, and family, women in the workplace. And so it was really that confluence of interests. We started having these conversations about the fact that no one was talking about cross-gender mentoring, and especially men mentoring women, and what that looks like when it's done well. Men tend to avoid that for a number of reasons. So we wanted to do a study that would provide some men some really clear tools on how to be better in those kind of relationships.
Great. And you've been obviously really successful with that particular, like you said, confluence of topics with Athena Rising and now with your next book coming out in the fall. So clearly you hit on a nerve and a hot topic.
Well, it's funny, Tanya. So we wrote Athena Rising, and literally, I think months later, Me Too came out. Me Too hit the airwaves.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting time because we've been advocating that men lean into, relationships with women at work and be part of the solution. And then there were all these false narratives after Me Too that women are dangerous. And so, yeah, that's been part of our work, is pushing back on some of that, and, helping guys recognize Me Too is just about women asking to come to work and not be assaulted or harassed. It's a super low bar for dudes to get over. And so, yeah, it's an interesting dialogue.
Yeah. Well, I would say I'm glad that you're one of the people on the forefront of trying to change the conversation a little bit or focus it in a productive direction. So thank you for that. I want to go over some of the basics for both mentees, so those being mentored, and the mentor, the person doing the mentoring. So let's start with mentees. And I'm going to talk even from my own personal experience. We certainly hear that we should have mentors, and some companies are now coming forward and introducing or trying to develop mentoring programs, right, within the workplace. But I can also imagine that some people are thinking, okay, is this really necessary with all the other things that I'm supposed to do to build my career and in my professional, in my profession? Um, you know, do I really have time for this? It sounds time consuming. So I want to hear Brad, the mentoring guru, tell us, why is having a mentor important? Is it really necessary for a career?
Yeah, because another great question. And so I think there's a two-part answer to that, Tanya. Number one, the data is really clear. I mean, if you want to look at the evidence, those of us that are lucky enough to have mentors, especially good mentors, do better.
Yeah.
And by that I mean we make more money, we get more promotions, we have more career advancement opportunities, we're happier with our career,
Mm.
work-life integration feels a little easier to manage. For lots of reasons, it's good for you. So I don't think there's much doubt about that anymore. I think, though, that the other piece of that is you don't need just one mentor. And I think sometimes aspiring mentees worry, I've got to find the one, the guru.
Right.
And you really don't. We're finding, the evidence shows that if you have a network of people who are
Mhm.
all sort of in your corner, and they might all serve different purposes, and you can go to them for different reasons or questions. That can be just as powerful as having, one terrific mentor. So I broaden your focus a little bit, I think, and look
Mhm.
for a variety of people who seem interested in you.
It's interesting. I think it was an article I read that talked about, that we always often strive for these few really deep just relationships, and not necessarily mentoring relationship, but just relationships in our lives. And we look for those that are just really deep and rich. But that studies even show that just from a general relationship standpoint, having sort of kind of lower bar relationships, and many of them in our life, is almost more important, or
Yeah,
can have a bigger impact than having 3 to 5 really deep relationships. So it sounds like that applies to kind of the mentoring world as well a little
yeah,
bit. Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, so I'm convinced we all need a mentor or a network of people in our corner. Next, I need to find someone, or I need to find this network. How do we go about finding one or several mentors? And of course, not just any mentor, but we want good people, right, in our corner. So how do we go about that?
Yeah, excellent question. And I think there's kind of a two-part answer for that. So, number one, in terms of who I'm looking for, the kind of person, what we find, mentors who tend to be highly valued by mentees have great emotional intelligence. They're great communicators. They listen to you.
Mhm.
They ask curious questions. They seem to be interested in where you would like to go in your career, not where he or she wants you to go.
Mhm.
So I would start looking for those things. Who are the good people to talk to, that are more senior to you? And you'll sort of know who these are because all the junior people in the workplace know who those folks are, right?
Mhm.
They're the people that are caring, they're interested, they seem to have an orientation to helping. In terms of how, the second part to that, I mean, Sheryl Sandberg, who wrote Lean In, says that, when she's out speaking, frequently young women will come up to her and just point blank, with no preamble, say, "Will you be my mentor?"
Right, the dream mentor.
Will you be my mentor? And she says it is such a mood killer, right?
Mhm.
I don't even know this person, and she's asking for a relationship.
Right.
And so we find that's often not the best way to go about it. So I might approach it with a very specific contextualized ask, right? So I've seen that you have managed to have experience in this area, and I'm really interested in that. Or I saw you do this presentation on blank, and I'm really interested. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Would it be okay if I take you to coffee, or could I get a little bit of your time? That's an easy ask. And there's very clear context. I know exactly why you want to talk to me. And I'm usually happy to do that. I think
Mhm.
most people are. So I might not ask for a full on relationship. I
Mhm.
might ask for a conversation. And what we know about human psychology is once you have a few of those, the potential mentor starts to like you. That's just how we work.
Mhm.
Mere exposure effect. We like people we spend some time with. So small asks often lead to bigger, more developed relationships.
And it sounds like what you're saying with the Sheryl Sandberg example is that it should probably be someone that's at least within your radius of work, not someone you've just come across at a conference who was a great speaker, right? But someone that's already within your world a little bit.
So what I would say is thinking of that network model. I
Mm,
would say it doesn't have to be one or the other,
okay.
and occasionally the bold mentee
Hmm.
really strikes gold by taking a risk. And maybe you're studying something in college,
Hmm.
and there's this famous scientist who's written in your area, and you send him or her an email, and lo and behold, they respond and they're really happy to talk to you about their research, and that leads to some ongoing connection. So don't be afraid to do that. But I like your idea of also having some people more local that are more accessible.
Right, right. Okay. So now we know a little bit about why, obviously, and how to find a mentor or a mentoring network of some sort, or people, in our corner. But I can imagine that for many of us, it can still feel a little intimidating. I'm thinking of folks who are just generally more introverted than extroverted. And sort of that bold ask is like, oh my God, I could never, right? Or women in male dominated fields, as is an area of your expertise, and even minorities. So what do you see as being one of the greatest barriers to finding a mentor, and what advice would you give to someone who says, I'd like to, but I just not
Mhm.
really confident enough to overcome those barriers?
Yeah. It's such a common experience, I think, for people, especially who are very junior, right? Either brand new students or brand new employees. I have this very common syndrome, the imposter syndrome. And I think that, I got hired by mistake anyway, and pretty soon everyone's going to figure out I'm incompetent, I'll get
Right.
fired. And so, and then I see these very accomplished senior people around me, and I don't feel worthy to bother them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think mentees can do something. They can work on that themselves. They can try and overcome that. Make those small asks. Those are often not quite as daunting.
Mm-hmm.
Go to events or meetings or other things where that person will be. So you might strike up even a short conversation. And then don't overlook the value of peers, right? It doesn't have to be somebody several levels above you.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes someone who's just a few years ahead of you can be quite helpful, and you can begin developing that network more locally with people that aren't quite so advanced. I would also say another answer to this question, though, is mentors have got to recognize that junior folks have the imposter experience. And
Right.
so, man, if you fancy yourself as somebody who's got some mentor cred,
Mm-hmm.
you have to look around at the high talent junior people and take some initiative to initiate conversation, break the ice a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the onus can be entirely on the prospective mentee.
Hmm. That's encouraging as well. Yeah, it's to not put it all on the mentee, but those mentors kind of need to look up from their desks every once in a while, look around at the
Yes.
potential that they are surrounded by, and sort of and
Yeah, and
foster that.
you mentioned the introvert. In my world in academe, we have way too many introverts. We're all
Yeah.
introverted, and we love to be in our office with the door closed,
Mhm.
writing or something. And so those of us who are introverted on the mentor side
Mhm.
really have to work at this. I have to be thoughtful and make myself more accessible, and that's important.
Mhm. One other thing you said about it doesn't have to be someone very senior to you. It could be someone who's just even a year or two ahead of you. I think um, that a mentoring relationship can have different purposes. So I would think, someone who's either new in a job or new at a company you're not looking for a mentor that's going to, put your career on some sort of trajectory. You're maybe looking for a mentor that just shows you like where the kitchen is and how do things
Yes.
operate around
Oh,
here at a basic level. It doesn't have to be some
absolutely.
sort of deep career driving relationship necessarily.
I think you're absolutely right, Tanya. And often those folks that aren't quite so far ahead of you are really going to have good empathy for what it was like just a couple of years ago for them.
Mhm.
And so they're more likely to offer you social support, right? And
Right.
and check in and be encouraging and help you battle the imposter syndrome. that person very senior might be a terrific sponsor, right?
Mhm.
Maybe he or she can open doors and kind of, help you make the next big step in your career, that sort of thing. But I think you need both.
Right.
You need both types of support.
And the first one can be almost like a little practice mentoring relationship before
Yeah.
you kind of get into a more intense one. Okay, so you've given us some great info on what to do, but I also want to make sure that we steer clear of making any mentoring snafus. You had mentioned the Sheryl Sandberg example of, okay, don't approach, a keynote speaker at a conference, hey, will you be my mentor? But what is another big mistake you see mentees make that we should absolutely avoid?
Good question. I think there are a couple of things I might mention. I mean, beyond that immediate big ask that can feel overwhelming to a
Mhm.
mentor, watch the stickiness. Mentors are busy for the most part. So
Mhm.
try and be really precise with what would be helpful and
Mhm.
think ahead. If you're going to have a meeting or you've got coffee scheduled, think really clearly about what you're hoping to benefit, and if you can convey that really clearly to the prospective mentor, how they can be useful to you, that is really helpful.
Mhm.
So be thinking, be planful about that. When the mentor gives you advice or recommendations or trying to be helpful, don't ignore that, right?
Right.
Follow up, let them know what you thought about that, and
Mhm.
maybe, and even if you didn't decide to take their advice, let them know why and give them some context for that.
Mhm.
If they're doing something really helpful for you, or they said something that was really useful, make sure you follow up and tell them how helpful that was, because often you'll get more of that if they know what is useful for you. They'll
Mhm.
they'll continue to do that. Um, and then watch your perfectionism. I
Yeah.
think often mentees have this thing where they don't want their mentor to know they're not perfect,
Mhm.
and so they present as having everything figured out. And the problem with that is mentors then don't really have much to do. I don't know how to be helpful for you.
Right.
So you got to be a little authentic and maybe share a bit about what you're struggling with or unsure about, because now I have something I can maybe, offer you.
Right. Okay. Great. Well, that was really helpful. So let's move on to talking about mentors, those who are uh, mentoring others. What are some of the main characteristics that make someone a good mentor? What kind of personality or professional experience should I have to say, I think I'd be a good mentor for someone else?
Yeah, good question. I think that the really I sort of think of competence to be a mentor. There are two different main sort of categories of things I'm looking for. Number one are things that I don't think we can develop in a training seminar. And
Mhm.
these are more fundamental interpersonal skills and orientation. So I mentioned EQ. Are
Mhm.
you somebody who has empathy? Are you somebody who listens well? Are you somebody who has kind of a grasp of self-awareness, right?
Right.
Can you modulate your own emotions? Somebody like that who's got this sort of warm, caring sort of demeanor.
Mhm.
I think most mentees will tell you that's a nice person to interact with. Those are hard skills to develop. They can get better, but I would look for somebody who has those already. And then the other big cluster of things I'm looking for are actual mentoring skills, right? And these are things we can all get better at, as
Mhm.
long as we have some basic emotional intelligence. So not making assumptions about my mentee or where he or she wants to go in their career, generous listening, when I'm actually with them, making time,
Mhm.
keeping appointments, reaching out if I haven't seen them for a while. The career functions, willingness to open doors, willingness to make
Mhm.
introductions, and I can only do that well once I've done the listening and heard where he or she wants to go
Mhm.
in their career. Now I have a sense of how I might be helpful. Another thing I'll offer is mentors who do this well are willing to challenge, right?
Mhm.
I can't just be affirming and kind. If I know where you want to go in your career and I know there are a bunch of things you need to get better at before you get there, I need to share those with you
Mhm.
and then help you find opportunities to practice those, and then give you the challenge and the support to go with it, along the way. So those are some of the things I would look for in terms of mentor competence. And I would say, just as an aside, far too many organizations don't take that seriously. They will take anybody above a certain level and force them into these mentor programs as a mentor,
Yeah.
and that's often not a good setup for the mentees as far as how they'll have an experience.
Right. Yeah. That's, I think, a good point in, looking for those character or having those characteristics, but looking for those characteristics as well. And not everyone necessarily has or is willing to, or ready to be a mentor. And then you may be doing someone sort of in a way, a longer term disservice. Say, I had a really
Yeah,
bad mentoring relationship. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that again.
yeah,
So you want to make sure
right.
it's a positive one. So people who could be good mentors, and we talked about the time piece a little bit, are also super busy and may feel like, I just don't really have the time for this. I don't have time. I have so many meetings already. I can't go to another coffee date with somebody. Um, so what's in it for the mentors? There's got to be some other bit in there for them. How do they benefit from being a
Yeah.
mentor?
Well, let me address that first piece you just mentioned first, and I
Mm-hmm.
would kind of describe that as good boundaries and self-care, because exactly what you said happens, Tanya. People know who the good mentors are, and so they often get overwhelmed and they risk getting burned out if they say yes to everybody. I can't do that, and so I've got to be somewhat selective. I can be kind and encouraging to a whole bunch of people,
Mm-hmm.
but in terms of bandwidth to really develop more substantial relationships, that's a smaller number, and I've
Mm-hmm.
got to be thoughtful about how I'm doing. I think in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and now I've forgotten your question.
Oh, like what's in it for the mentor? What
Oh,
could
what's in it for me?
benefit?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So again, boy, at this point, the evidence is so clear. Mentors benefit substantially,
Mm-hmm.
and in different ways. When you ask mentors in research studies how they benefit, usually you hear about the intrinsic rewards, right? I just enjoy it, and I feel like I'm giving to the next generation. I'm paying forward. It's very kind of meaningful to me.
Mm-hmm.
Working with somebody junior is really synergistic, kind of exciting and creative. It helps me not get stale in my career. It helps me learn about new things. So they'll talk about the real reciprocity, kind of benefits. I will also say, though, there are some external benefits, meaning
Mm-hmm.
some more tangible rewards. So we often find mentors get opportunities later in their career because of somebody they mentored, who's now progressed to a certain point in their career that they can reach back out and invite the mentor to do things or include them in projects or things like that. So these kind of secondary extrinsic rewards. I think smart organizations certainly recognize who the great mentors are and they reward them, right?
Mm-hmm.
They give them credit in different ways. Sometimes there are mentor awards, sometimes there are course reductions in teaching if they're doing a lot of this. There are different ways smart organizations can recognize really talented mentors.
Right. Recognition is important. People like to be recognized for
Yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah.
So does the relationship or I guess the seeking of a mentor, does that ever flip in the way of a mentor going to find a mentee? We always think about, okay, I need a mentor, so I'm going to go find one. But does that ever flip around where the mentor is the one actually seeking out a potential mentee?
It's really interesting. I so rarely hear somebody senior saying, I really need to go find someone to mentor. I
Mhm.
rarely hear that.
Yeah.
So I think the way, unless it's a formal matched program, right, where I've
Mhm.
been assigned to somebody, often this happens through mere exposure again, right? And
Mhm.
and often most of us are attracted to working with people that we see as high potential, right?
Mhm.
They're super smart, they're motivated, they seem really organized, they have great ideas. And, if I'm really thinking proactively for my organization or my profession, I think to myself, gosh, I want to make sure we keep that person. I want to
Mhm.
make sure we retain them. So that might lead to more curious conversations I might have with them. I express interest. In a perfect world, that's reciprocated by the prospective mentee, and there you
Right.
go. Now a relationship is developing that could be really helpful for the mentee and fun for me as a mentor.
Mhm.
Um, I would say that if you want to increase the probability that you have some great mentees, then be what I call a mentor of the moment.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is I have so many opportunities during the course of a day, walking to the coffee room, going to a meeting and being willing to linger a few minutes after the meeting just to chat with people. I have so many opportunities to have a 5-minute conversation with somebody junior who I might not know,
Mhm.
um, introduce myself, affirm them on something I've seen them working on, or maybe something they just said in the meeting or whatever it is. Express real interest in them and what they're working on, for example. That is not a heavy lift. And it is so deeply uplifting for the junior person who's feeling like an imposter.
Mhm.
Have somebody senior express interest and care and concern and maybe affirmation. I think that's a great way to ensure that you're going to develop some developmental relationships, because those people are going to look you up. They're going to come back. They'll take you up on your offer to stop by if they ever want to discuss it further. And pretty soon you're going to find you're pretty busy.
Mhm. And I think you brought up two good points on, just doing that can certainly help from a retention standpoint. It's like, okay, I'm also making sure I'm taking 5 minutes, but I'm making sure that maybe the best are sticking around and not going
Yes.
elsewhere. And you really sort of lifted, I think, the pressure off a little bit. Like, it doesn't have to be an hour coffee meeting once a month. It can be 5 minutes after a meeting, and that can have a big impact as well.
Absolutely. And I think too many people, when they think of mentoring, think I got to pull out my mentoring contract and make it
Right.
very formal. And no, you don't have to do that. I think that feels really awkward in
Yeah.
most cases. And so, yeah, let it begin informally.
So again, we want to make sure that our mentors aren't making any wrong moves when it comes to the mentor-mentee relationship. So what is one mistake that you would give people some warning about that they should avoid if they're a mentor?
Yeah, there's I hope we have like 2 hours
I know,
for
I was
this.
gonna say this is a really loaded question.
Let me just kind of mention a couple of biggies.
Yeah.
So number one, you really have to be careful. And I think this really gets to that issue of self-awareness and emotional intelligence. You have to be very careful not to try and clone mentees in your own image. And this is kind of part of human nature. It's easy to make this mistake. I see this high potential person, maybe they remind me of myself at that, junior level. And unconsciously, if I can persuade them to do exactly what I've done in my career, it's sort of validating, the choices that I've made, and it will make me feel better in some way, how cool they want to be just like me. But that could be a real disservice to my mentee, and not taking into account what his or her ideal career dream looks like, and what her ideal self looks like in the workplace. Where does she really want to go? I really have to listen and be genuine with that, and not try and impose my career plan on this person. The other big one, I guess I would just call out in terms of potential mistakes, is to go missing. There's nothing I think more damaging potentially for a junior person to have somebody senior sort of suggest they're really interested in mentoring, and start a relationship off with that, and then never reach out again.
Mm.
I think maybe the truth is you just got busy or forgot, but the reality is the way that mentee might interpret it is they're not worth your time, right? Or they're not very good, whatever. And that's certainly not what you intend to convey, but that may be what comes across.
Yeah. Those are, yeah, two really good points. So, as you know, some of the work that we do here at Diamond Six, we use stories quite a bit to sort of as examples or illustrations, and because stories are really a powerful way for adults to learn. Not only are they informative, but they're also inspiring, and there's nothing wrong with being a little inspired to give us a kick in the pants in the right in the right direction. So, can you briefly share a personal mentoring success story with us?
Yeah, yeah. And that's a pretty easy one. I actually will tell you, I've had several important career mentors, over time, but I'll just share maybe the primary mentor experience that I had. So, and it was my graduate school mentor. When I went for my PhD in clinical psych, the doctoral program had a policy. It was sort of like the NFL draft, I think, when they were admitting students. Each faculty member got, I don't know, a couple new doctoral students every year. And then it was very personalized because my mentor Chuck Ridley made a phone call and offered me admission personally to work with him, in the program. And the beauty of that was it really conveyed to me early that he wanted to work with me, and he had kind of plucked me out of the number of applications they had and found
Mhm.
something interesting. It really set the relationship off on a nice trajectory. I think there was kind of mutual commitment from the very beginning. And for me, it was kind of a takeaway. And I always encourage, if you're in a formal mentoring program and as the mentor, um, make sure that you're the one who makes the initial call, or the initial contact, because it conveys something to the mentee about being chosen that I think really feels good. It's very affirming, but it starts a relationship in a very positive way. Um, our mentorship was very connected, over the course of graduate school. And then kind of the happy outcome of this mentorship is that it has endured, for gosh, heading toward 30 years now. Um, and and we've written together. We wrote the elements of mentoring together. So we have sort of, I think, message takeaway is that many mentorships that are really great ones go on in perpetuity. And even if you don't continue to work together like Chuck Ridley and I have, um, there's a sense that your mentor's always there for you, right? Always in your corner. And, as long as they're alive, there's always a sense I could reach out to him or her and just get some affirmation or some career direction or whatever would be useful for me. And that's certainly been the case for me. So I never underestimate the enduring value of what I would just describe as really meaningful collegial friendships that
Mhm.
often develop from these longer term mentorships.
And I think you said a key word, which is friendship. I think that's really what so many of us kind of want and need more of. And so the idea that it can, if you put in the time, which we talk about being busy, but if you put in some time and bring your authentic self, that really that can develop into a wonderful friendship as well, which is lovely
Yeah.
and really, really valuable. Okay, so we're going to move on to our rapid fire questions. So,
Okay.
Brad, are you ready?
I think so. I feel like it's a game show here.
Right, I know, we have some game show music in the background. So, I'm going to ask you 10 questions, and you're going to give the first answer that comes to mind. So, are you ready? All right, if you could have any superpower, what would it be and why?
Superpower. Wow. If I could have any superpower, honestly, as much as I love sleeping, I would love to go without sleep and still be super on it and energized, right?
Okay.
Just
Mm-hmm.
because I love what I do so much, I'd like to do it all the time. So, yeah, that would be an awesome one. No
That
need for
would be a good
sleep.
one. That would be a
Yeah.
good one. I haven't heard that one before. If you could go back in time and be present for a historical event, what would it be?
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. Um, Gosh, if I had to pick just one, um, I live here in DC, and I teach at the Naval Academy, and you know, it would be really fun for me to be here in Annapolis when George Washington
Mhm.
um, resigned his commission. It was sort of a setting experience for our country because it set the pattern for military generals turning leadership of our country over to civilian government, and
Mhm.
and it happened right here, and the room where it happened is still here in our state house. So
Right.
that would be an awful fun thing to watch.
Interesting. That's a really specific one. I like that.
Yeah.
What is the best advice you've ever received?
Gosh, I've received so much advice. Um, well, let me just kind of put it in broad context of cross-gender
Hmm.
learning and mentoring, because, and this is something more recent, Tanya, but it was a really powerful experience for me. When Dave Smith and I were writing our first book, Athena Rising, how men can be better mentors for women. I've been studying mentoring forever, and the word guiding is sort of a synonym for mentorship. You know, you
Mhm.
hear that word used a lot. So our working title for the book was Guiding Athena.
Okay.
And and luckily our publishing house was all women,
Mm.
and they're brilliant and really thoughtful. And they called and said to Dave and I, dudes, have you thought about how the word guiding might land with women?
Right.
that that they've got to be guided by a man. And you know, it's kind of an epiphany light bulb moment.
Mhm.
But I guess I would frame this as advice about having some humility and really learning from somebody who's different than you, and in my case, gender.
Mhm.
Because as a man, I just would have missed that completely, and it would have made the book have a whole different tone. And so she really saved us from ourselves, you know, in a lot of ways, and that was a powerful experience for
Interesting. And that was a piece of advice that you took, which is good.
me. Yeah.
What I know you said you love what you do, but if you could take a day and try a different job or career just for a day, what would it be?
Oh, definitely novelist.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
And that may not be that far afield, but
Yeah.
that probably shows you I'm an introvert. But yeah, I would love to try my hand at doing something more creative.
Interesting. If you could speak any language fluently, what would it be?
Another interesting one. Even though it's less popular, I'd have to say French. And the reason I say that is I love Switzerland and
Mm.
have been there a number of times. And when I'm there, I've always wished I had paid more attention in high school French
Hmm.
and, you know, mastered that a bit more, because I just would love to be able to demonstrate that I'm making the effort and blend in a little bit more.
Right.
and and I'm not able to do that. So yeah,
Okay.
maybe someday.
There's still time. There's still time.
Yeah.
What is your favorite song?
Oh, interesting. I would have to say I Can't Tell You Why by the Eagles.
Ah,
Yeah, I've just always loved that tune.
good one. Early
Yeah.
to bed or night owl?
Um, that answer has flipped
Oh,
as I've aged.
uh-huh.
So my kids would tell you now I'm early to bed. So,
Hmm.
you know, by 10 o'clock, I'm gone.
Right.
And in the old days, I was brewing a cup of coffee at 10 as a junior professor. So I think
Right.
that's the effect of aging.
Probably, yeah. Favorite childhood television show?
Wow. Um, I'd have to say The Rifleman, and that may go way back, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, serial Western
Okay.
that my dad and I would watch together. And so probably has that special meaning for me. But yeah, I love that show.
Nice. At a movie theater, do you get popcorn or candy?
I'm a candy guy.
All right. So then that moves on to the next question. What is your favorite ice cream flavor? You're a sweet person.
Yes. So it's got to, if I have my choice, rum raisin.
Oh,
Yeah.
if you can find that. I don't know if you can find that anywhere.
You know, I find it occasionally and I
Okay,
love it. Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
And last one, what are you currently reading?
Um, you know, I am doing a lot of different reading, but I'll just confess I'm two different books I have going right now, and
Mhm.
I think this will show you that with all the more serious scholarly stuff I do, these are more cathartic kinds of books. So
Yeah.
I love Lee Child,
Hmm.
and you know the Jack Reacher
Hmm.
series. So I got one
Hmm.
of those going, and then a Clive Cussler
Oh,
novel. So
okay.
Clive Cussler's all about swashbuckling, you
Right.
know, adventure, and he's got this series on the Oregon Files, and
Oh,
so I'm reading one of those right
okay. Yeah. So fun. So yeah. So more fun. Well, lighter reading, I
now. They're
guess.
they're lighter, yeah, absolutely,
Right.
yeah.
Great. Well, Brad, thank you so much for joining me again for this faculty spotlight. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your thoughts, your insights, and your perspective on mentoring. If you want to learn more about Brad and the topic of mentoring, be sure to check out his website. Again, is wbradjohnson.com. Thank you so much for watching this faculty spotlight. If you found this helpful, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and I will see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.